Hey everyone, thanks for joining our Midweek podcast. My name is Andrew and I am your host, and joining me today, we have the kids in the room, I guess. I mean, well, it's student ministry. Neither one of you are students, but you both have your own kids. So yeah, no, this Sunday was student takeover day. Get back on track, Andrew. Man, nobody else is here to get us off track, so there I am to just do it and,
Not our fault
take
this
the
week.
place. Joining me this week is Pastor Scott Noggle, who preached on Sunday with Student Takeover Day, but also Pastor Luke Adams. Both of you guys are youth pastors here and oversee student ministries, not just at West Lawn, but also, Scott, you're over West Lawn and North.
West Lawn and beyond.
Yeah,
Yes.
and soon to be Reading.
Soon to be Reading.
Yep, good stuff. So let's talk about Sunday and
with
Sunday's
the intro.
message.
I just got to give a quick shout out. So you
was a
mentioned
terrible intro.
You mentioned the kids in the room, and yeah, we minister to kids. But Scott, he has a birthday this month. He is by far no longer a kid.
No
The
longer
big
a child.
5-0.
Yeah.
So
it's painful.
if you're listening to this and you see him this month, say happy birthday.
I'm sure he loves that.
I appreciate that so
Love it.
much. Thank you. More than you'll all ever know.
Well,
Yeah.
happy birthday,
Thank
Scott.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This week was Student Takeover Day. We still were in the Promises series.
Yeah.
And you guys, Scott, you brought a message about the promise of God's
God's plan. Promise of God's plan.
Yeah,
Yep.
in your life, and tied it to Student Takeover. So to kick us off and our conversation start off today, why don't you just give us a brief recap of your main points from Sunday?
Yeah. Let's do a recap. So, like Andrew said, it was Student Takeover Day. It was also Grad Sunday, so we celebrated our graduates as well. This has become a tradition now. This is actually year 6. We started celebrating graduates in our worship service in 2020. That was the first time we ever celebrated grads on our main stage, and so. So we were in the Promises series, and I had the privilege of jumping into that series, talking about God's plan for your life. And we landed on 4 main points, which is God's plan is always good, even when it's not easy. God's plan brings hope when you trust his timing. God's plan involves you calling out to him, and God's plan is found in wholehearted seeking. And the idea was, we kind of landed on that the greatest success isn't just achieving your plans, it's aligning your plans to God's. And I think when we talk about graduation and we talk about, specifically for graduates, when you look at what's next, it can be daunting and it can be scary. And I opened the message by saying that graduation is both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But I don't think that just applies to graduates. I've got some friends in ministry who are stepping into new areas in their life, and we were talking about it after the service, and they were, man, that resonated with me too. I talked to a gentleman on Sunday after church, and he graduated. He got a certificate for, I don't know, some kind of trade, and he had an interview on Monday, and so it spoke to him about, hey, God's plan is always good, because you're stepping into what's next. And I just think lots of times we like to sugarcoat God's plan. How about this? This thought just came to me. We like to sugarcoat and microwave God's plan. Mm-hmm. We want God's plan to be super fast and super easy, both at the same time. And like, I'm talking to a friend this week, and he's making some life-changing changes coming up. And it's been a 7-year process. 7 years ago, God began speaking to him like, this is where I want you to, you're going to step into something new, and how many of us in our lives, the older, like Luke said, I turned 50 this month. So this year marks 28 years as a youth pastor for me. So I've been through a lot of seasons in youth ministry, but the one thing that's interesting to me is that the years go by fast, but the seasons tend to feel slow. And so sometimes you know a change is coming and you're excited for the change, but God's timing isn't my timing. And so like one of the things I talked about is God's plan brings hope when you trust his timing. And so I just think sometimes in and I want to say in American Christian culture, we like to sugarcoat and microwave God's plan. We want it super easy and we want it super fast. And that might be a society thing, to be honest with you. Like one of the things I said on Sunday, there are some fast food restaurants, and I will not put this out there in a podcast form for any fast food restaurants to come at me, but there's some fast food restaurants. There's some restaurants, fast food restaurants.
I don't think they're
Wow,
listening.
just in case. Yeah, that's good. That's good. We think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. But there are some fast food places, and some, like I don't go there anymore because they're fast food, but they're not fast enough, and it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
And so, or the whatever the restaurant smells.
You don't want
funny.
to start naming them?
No, I do not. No, I do not.
It's definitely not Chick-fil-A. I know
It's not Chick-fil-A, but I don't go to Chick-fil-A often. It's okay. I like it, but I don't love it. So anyway, it's God's chicken. So if you listen and you're from Chick-fil-A, hey, we love Chick-fil-A. Thank you for allowing us to buy your nuggets once a year for our student ministries. But anyway, like I said, I just think we think that God's plan should be super easy and super fast. And nowhere in Scripture is there really ever an example of that. Like I was thinking, the Old Testament, you've got David. David is a shepherd boy anointed to be king. And then he went back to the field for 7 years. And then he faced Goliath. And then he went for 7 more years. And then he was anointed king. So it was a 14-year from the promise to the fulfillment of the plan for him to reach that, And so I think that, I'll give you an example. One of our graduates who graduated, she's a girl graduating from high school. What are your future plans? To receive my doctorate in, and I don't remember the field of study, but she said what she wanted to feed it. And I honestly thought, wow, that's really easy for you to say because a doctorate is like a 12-year process for whatever it is, and I'm not sure you know what I'm saying? But in our minds, we think, oh, well, it's just super easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it was a really powerful message and just a reminder, just in that. But like there was a lot of other stuff going on that day that you guys were also doing as a student ministry team. Luke, do you want to just kind of give a recap of everything in case if our listeners missed Sunday and missed the excitement of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Student Takeover Grad Sunday is so exciting. We love when there's students on stage and being honored, and there's so much energy in the room. We honored, I believe it was 59 graduates, both high school and college graduates.
Yep.
And then we had 23 students take the next step in their faith to get water baptized, which is absolutely incredible to see teenagers owning their faith in front of their whole church, being unashamed and saying that I love Jesus. And so we love that. We had 2 students also do the announcement break. Kemi and Jocelyn, they are students at Wilson High School. Kemi is just graduating though, but they did incredible. And then we had students on the worship team. We had students greeting people as they walked in the worship center. And I just love as a church when we can blend together all the generations and we can come together being one church and one body, using our gifts and worshiping God. And so I think if you walked in that room and you didn't sense enthusiasm and passion and celebration, maybe you got to check your pulse because it was a powerful weekend, and yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, I loved how intertwined it was. I thought it was a great example of how intertwined our church is with our individual ministries. Let me see if I can explain this. And to the casual attender, you might not notice this, but one of the things that struck out to me was take the worship team, for instance. The worship leader for the day is Mara. Mara's my daughter, but also a graduate of GTSM 3 years ago now. But then next to her was Trinity, who just finished her 10th grade year at one of our local Christian schools, and the name just
is it TKA?
It's not TKA. Okay. No. Anyway, one of our local Christian schools, and then her dad was playing drums. Russ, our keyboard was a graduate from high school. The guitar player the lead guitar player, his name's Jesse. He just graduated from college, but he also went to road trip with us and was on our road trip worship team a couple weeks ago. The bass player was Justin Cox, who was a graduate from our ministry, who also went to road trip with us. The other singers in the front were 2 high school graduates. The girls just graduated from high school this year. Max, and then the guys that were on the stage were Max is one of our small group leaders, and the other singer on the stage was a guy named Angeli, who's one of our tech guys who runs sound for us like every other week. And
now is singing in preteen on his off weeks at GTS.
Yeah, so he's now leading worship in preteen. And the cool thing about Angeli is he came in as a tech guy, and he now, one of the things that he owns when he's in the room is our 9 square. Like, I went looking for my tech guy one weekend, and I'm like, he's literally in the middle of the 9 square game, because if he's not running sound, he's playing 9 square with the students, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and before we kind of jump into some deeper stuff, I want to reiterate and I think you mentioned this, Scott, the importance of the church to pour into the next generation.
Yeah.
The reality is, if it stops here, like it stopped, and we as a church need to prioritize building up and training up the next generation.
Yes. Yeah, and I challenged our church on Sunday at both of our services that if we don't give the keys of leadership to the next generation while they're still young, our church will eventually die. Because a good leader, if they don't have anything to do, they'll go find something else to do because they're good leaders, because they're leaders. And also, the other thought that hit me while I was sharing it, as literally I was processing on stage while sharing this, was if we need to give the keys to leadership to the next generation while they're still young enough to learn, and we as the leadership generation are still young enough to coach them. Because it's not, okay, I'm walking out the door, here's the keys, I'm finished, you take over. It needs to be a smooth transition, or we'll lose people in the process. And so I'm always, and the older I get, the more I'm realizing this of like, gosh, what are we doing? What kind of seats are we making at a leadership table? I have friends who attend a church, and they actually have a board member's seat for someone in their 20s. Now, we're not there yet as a church, but they added an extra seat to their board because they wanted someone in their 20s on the board. It was the 20s or 30s or something like that. But the idea was, we want to get young, we want to provide a window for young leadership. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Part
of like reaching down and like reaching the next generation makes me think of the story you told. I'd rather you tell it because you just said it so well, about how like Mike Wenzel, with Isak, and then Isak with Ethan, and then Ethan with the younger kids, and like, that was such a good story. It was inspiring to think we're just reaching one step down. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the story. We have a guy named Mike, and I believe my best guess at this point, as I can figure, is about 13 years ago, he started being a small group leader for a group of second or third graders, I believe. One of his boys in his group was named Isak. Isak then went and graduated high school. When Isak graduated high school, he decided he wanted to be a small group leader for, at that time, it was 6th grade boys as they were coming into GTSM. And so Isak began, Mike was Isak's small group leader from the 3rd grade all the way through till he graduated from high school. Mike and a guy named Joel. Mike and Joel, great news too, they are both board members here at GT. And so they're on our church board, and they're incredible guys. So Isak was leading his group for about a year by himself. And Mike came along to road trip one year as one of our crash team guys, one of our like help setup guys. And he essentially saw Isak just struggling a little bit, like, hey, you could use my help. And so he came to me and said, hey, I want to help Isak in his group. Now this has now been 2 years ago when the boys were in 7th grade. Those boys are now just finished 9th grade. And so now the 2 of them lead a group with a young boy in that group, a guy in that group, his name is Ethan Williams. Ethan Williams is a 9th grade, ninth grader, and on Sunday mornings he comes to the 9 a.m. GTSM service, but at 11 he is a communicator and a small group leader for our kindergarten class. And so I was able to have a picture on our screen of Mike and Isak and Ethan from Road Trip, and then the next picture I had was Ethan with a young man named Lincoln Fick. Lincoln is a kindergartner. And he's as squirrely as a kindergartner can be. But I just love the picture of we're investing in the next generation. And the phrase I use that's really stuck with me since I started preparing for this message was, we're not playing the short game, we're playing the long game.
Yeah.
Discipleship is not, just like God's plan, discipleship is not microwavable. It doesn't, and nor can you sugarcoat it. I mean, it takes work and it takes time. And so I just love the idea. And I was sharing with our GT staff team this week that's a great story. But I could tell you other stories as well, where we have a young girl named Angela Geidick. And Angela Geidick graduated from our ministry in 2019 when she graduated from high school, and then picked up a group of seventh graders. She began volunteering with a group. I'm sorry, they weren't seventh graders at the time. I think they were in like eighth grade. She just kind of came alongside and helped them. Her girls are now graduating from high school right now. And we're in talks to figure out where she's going to slide back to and who is she going to help with. And in that small group are people that are going to college. One of them being Kaylee Dewar, who's been on she's going to Honduras in a couple months. She's going to go to college to Messiah in the fall to study sports management, but also minor in youth pastoring. So this idea of we're investing in the long term, and it's why small group leaders matter so much to our church. Yeah, because we just see the life change.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on life change, I mean, baptisms is obviously a celebration of life change. And I mean, there were 23 kids who went public with their faith. So there's 23 great stories there. But like, are there any that really jump out that you guys would love to just kind of share with our listeners who, because it's such a short, like we don't get to really sit with all the stories and really go deeper. And there are, even though they're teenagers, there are powerful stories there that I think would benefit people hearing of the life change.
Luke, can you tell us what you know about Yandiel's story?
Yeah. So cool. Student name, I think it's pronounced Jondi. But yeah, so
shameless plug, by the way, starting point guard for the Wilson High School basketball team.
Let's go, Izzy. Come on.
And the reason I know that is because Pastor Karey, who is our care pastor, goes to every Wilson High School football and basketball game, both home and away.
Wow. Okay.
He is a season ticket holder at home, and he travels to every away game.
Yeah.
So the other day I talked about him in our service planning, and he's like, "Oh yeah, yada, he's a starting point guard." He just started rolling off because he just knew him.
That's amazing. And you can tell because this student at our road trip retreat that we had in May, incredible retreat.
Yeah.
Right. He came to road trip, and he really just came for basketball. He came with a couple other Wilson basketball guys. If you're listening, Jaden, Barima, I doubt they're listening, but shout out to those guys. So came with like a Wilson basketball crew and hadn't been to the church, and he just came for basketball. We do a 3-on-3 basketball tournament at Road Trip, and so that team signed up. They entered the tournament, and honestly, they kind of demolished everybody. They were like the Wilson basketball players, and they were so good, and they won the tournament. But he came for basketball, but what happened was during the services, the messages, the worship, the altar time, God got a hold of his heart. And it was incredible to see this kid come for basketball, but then all of a sudden on Sunday morning, Pastor Scott gave a Scott, I always call you Scott. I don't know why I said Pastor Scott. Scott gave an invitation to get water baptized, and I was looking around the room to see who would stand up. And he's a student. I just didn't think he was going to stand up. I wasn't sure that he was really getting a whole lot out of the services because I knew why he came. But man, he shot up when that invitation came for water baptism, and he came out. And then I got to meet and talk with him. And he was just talking about how he wants to follow Jesus, and God got a hold of his heart. And so it was just incredible. Like, I feel like that's so cool. That's what it's about. Students come for relationships, for fun oftentimes, but like God gets a hold of their heart, and he got baptized. And now that same kid, he's going to be coming to summer camp in a little bit. And so really excited about what God's doing in his life.
Then we had another student, Aiden, and we've shared a story a lot here on staff, but we've never shared it. This is a great opportunity to do so. So Aiden's story is back in March, I believe, because it was after we talked about road trip. He came for the first time to GTSM, and I'm still not quite sure how he got here. I need to figure that out. But as in, did a friend invite him or did he just come? But that Sunday morning, one of our small group leaders was praying before service, and God showed him a vision that someone was going to get saved that day. And so he went to Pastor Luke, our small group leader, went to Luke and said, Luke, I think someone's going to get saved today. God showed me. And so that's all he said to him. And then Luke went and preached the message. End of the message, he was like, he felt him prompted, I'm going to give a salvation call. This kid, Aiden, gets saved that Sunday, raises his hand, comes and talks to Luke after service. After service is over, Brad comes up bawling, is crying because, this is a God thing. And he says, Luke, what I didn't tell you is God showed me that this was the kid. It wasn't just any kid. It was this kid, Aiden, in this black sweatshirt. This is the kid that's going to get saved today. Yeah. So then Aiden starts coming. Then we have someone in our church hears the story of Aiden and offers to pay for him to come to road trip. So Aiden goes, I pull Aiden aside the next Wednesday. I said, hey, bud, someone paid for your way to go to road trip. And Aiden's words to me that night, a 16-year-old junior in high school, says, this is the best day of my life. And he's almost in tears because someone volunteered to pay for him to go to road trip. So goes home and tells his mom, we talk with his mom. His parents are incredible. They reach out to us and they say, hey, we don't want to take a scholarship from another kid. We'll pay for him to go. But thank you so much. We're glad, whatever. Yeah. He comes to road trip. I say, who wants to get baptized on Sunday morning? And Aiden is the first student I see jump up out of his seat. He's also a high school football player, so he's one of the bigger kids that we've got. And so when this big dude stands up, and he got to celebrate his faith. And the cool part of his story is that I found out later his mom and dad actually came to church that Sunday, even though he was at road trip, and they watched the recap video on that Sunday, and they're not church attenders. They don't have a church history. And so it's just really cool how God is moving in life change. It was great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then we also had, there was a bunch of girls that got baptized too on Sunday. One of the girls got baptized. Jules is a 7th grade cheerleading flyer for Wyomissing's junior high school team. And so it's just this tiny 7th grade girl. But she just loves Jesus. And man, this Wyomissing 7th and 8th graders are like booming for us because we have like 6 or 7 kids who just keep bringing friends. Yeah. And so that part's just really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think all this stuff speaks to like trusting God's plan. Just even taking like Aiden right there, like specifically, like he was the only one who responded that Sunday, right? When he got saved?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. He was the only one. Yeah.
The only one.
Yeah.
Like this, like talking and just stepping back and thinking about, man, God loves us so much. Like, you weren't planning on doing a salvation call that week. And it was, hey, no, like this is time. Like just as a Christian, knowing like, man, God sees us and he loves us. And like, he wants us to have, the opportunities and it's his time. Like we don't know how he started coming here, but he did. Yeah. And now like he got to go to road trip and he got to like take the step to fully go public with his faith and trusting in God. Like it's really cool to just kind of be able to see and witness like the life change of people. Yeah. And I'm speaking for all of us here. Like it's awesome, and you guys get to see it, and you're interacting with it more than me, just in the differences of roles and stuff like that. But
it's a reminder too that God's plan isn't just like for the masses, it's also personal. Yeah, like he cares about every single person. Like as you were saying that, verse popped in my head, Jeremiah 1. I think it's verse 4 or 5, right? But he says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Yep. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations, right? Same guy who then, right, he's born, he's a prophet later, and he writes this verse, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Like it just speaks to the fact that God is so personal in his plan. He sees each person. Like he has a plan for you as an individual. I think that's so encouraging.
Well, and I think that's a good transition. Get to actually recapping and discussing the sermon. Is not always, and Scott, you said this, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
I can think about in my own life and where I am now and the role I sit in now. It was not an easy road to get.
Yeah.
There were lots of times along the way where, I was questioning God. I was questioning myself. Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I being selfish or ignorant to what I'm supposed to be doing? And then going through some really tough times, life, personally, work, like that just kind of like, I came to this position through a tough situation. And it was like through a tough situation where it was not at all my plan and like not at all my idea.
Yeah.
And like, I remember interviewing for this position. It's like, well, why do you want this position? I don't like, I didn't want this position.
I was
don't
in
want
the
this
room when
position.
you said that. Yeah.
Like, but this is clearly what is being laid out in front of me. And like, Scott, you've shared about your transition from Ohio to here. And like, I can just a scenario like that where that definitely is not the plan.
Yeah. So to fill in people that maybe didn't hear whatever parts of, so I was actually let go and fired from a church, not for any action that I did.
Just hit a couple kids, right?
I did not. I swear. Listen, no. No, but just to be fair, philosophical differences is probably the best way to describe it. And the church said, we want to go in a different direction. That's probably the best way to put it. And
it's not like you weren't there for 10 years.
No, I was also, I was there for 10 years. And to be fair, like I'm still friends on Facebook with the pastor who fired me. So like, but it's hard because God's plan is not linear. It looks much more like, as I'm sitting here, the mental picture I'm getting is, I hate roller coasters, but it's like the craziest roller coaster you can think of that has everything. There's a roller coaster at Knoebels, and Knoebels is just like this really old park, but they have this roller coaster there that essentially in a minute, in 90 seconds, it has what I think to be every major thing you'd want in a roller coaster. A super steep hill, it has a loop, it has a corkscrew, and it does all of these things within 90 seconds because it's a short ride as well. But and sometimes I feel like that's much more accurate to what our path is like. And I challenge people Sunday too, when it comes to God's plan, you can't get to point B if you don't leave point A. And like what I described to people, even when I was interviewing here now 13 years ago, was so the story of how I got here is I had a really uncomfortable meeting where I was let go, and the next week I put a post on Facebook thanking the church, and one of my really good friends was on staff here at the church and saw it and called me and asked, how you doing? And we had a 2-hour phone conversation. By the end of the phone conversation, it kind of turned into, I don't know what you're doing next, but we're going to have this role opening here at GT Church. And I've often said to him, if you would have called me a week before and asked me to come here, I would have told you no. I would not have even considered it. And I have a very similar story to Andrew, to your story, in how I got in the role that I'm in now. The person that had the role before left the church, and then the role is open. And so then it turns into, well, do you want this role? I don't know if I want this role. I wanted to work with him. Like I was here to work with my friend. And so, And so we don't always see the what's, the working behind the scenes that God is doing. God is always working even when we can't see it. Like, I think the way I've worded it on Sunday is, just because God is silent does not mean he's not working. And that's really hard because we are just wired to know what's next. And we are, and the further we get in as a society with technology, the more knowledge we have at our fingertips.
Yeah.
I mean, I just watched something last week that was challenging to people who preach and teach like I do, saying that we actually need to work harder now because there is no information that we can deliver that anyone who's listening to this podcast can't go get themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, now there's a God element to that of praying, studying, and this is what I think God wants me to share. But there's no piece of information that I can convey that anyone with a phone can't look up on their own. And I was telling the parent thing on Sunday night, a phrase like one of my dad jokes in my house when someone asks a question. My kids, if you aren't familiar with my family, my kids are 19 and 21. When someone asks a question and we don't know the answer, the phrase I always use is, if we only had these little boxes in our pockets that we could look information up on and Google it, which, by the way, we also pay several $100s a month to have. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, but we all have this information at our fingertips. And so, but that doesn't mean that I don't have a role in inspiration and also that God's not working behind the scenes. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah.
The phrase, or when you were talking about your story about getting fired from your church and then coming here, and then you've been here now for 13 years.
Yeah, 13 years.
And obviously it's the plan God had for you. You're here, you've been doing incredible work. And the phrase that popped in my head, I don't know who said it, who coined it. It's a great phrase that I think of sometimes, but it's not rejection, it's redirection, right?
That's good.
A week, if you were called a week earlier, you would have said no.
Yeah.
And that rejection turned into redirection for where God was calling you in your life. I think of Joseph, right, thrown in the pit, and thrown in prison and all these things. God, what's happening? And it took so long, right? It wasn't microwavable. But the only thing that I'll add to that, because sometimes I tell myself this, I talk with students about this though, is sometimes God's plan is long and there's trials and there's tribulations and there's suffering and there's things along the way. But we can't ever excuse our disobedience for just saying, well, it's just God's plan. Because it took David a long time from being anointed king to being king, Joseph having the dream to being, in the palace. But the Israelites, they weren't supposed to spend 40 years in the wilderness.
Right.
They were supposed to spend 40 days. And so sometimes there's also this long trial because of our disobedience. But God's a heavenly Father, and He brings correction and discipline. And so it's both. So what I always tell myself is, well, as long as I'm doing my best, 2 Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all my heart, right? Follow Him. And you said you can have hope when you trust God's timing, and you find God's plan when you seek Him wholeheartedly. So as long as I'm doing that, well, then whatever happens, I can trust God's promises.
Yeah.
And I can be at peace.
Well, how do you guys feel like as Christians we should balance that actively seeking God's will with patiently trusting His timing? Because it's, maybe it is a lot of today's society. I mean, every single kid who graduated, whether high school or college, is, well, what are you doing now?
Right.
What are you, there's an expectation that you should have a plan for your life. I mean, not to be negative, but even my kids have a board that they hold up on the first and last day of school, and what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to be what are
and your kids are 6 and right?
Yeah, is it
an ice cream man?
7 and 9. 7 and 9. So we're and they've done it every year since pre-K. What do you want to be? What are you going to do? Society, you need to have it figured out before you do it. And it feels like a lot of times God's no. And again, this is some self-reflecting. I had an idea of what God's next step for me was, and it was not that. And I was actively working towards, hey, I think this is what God is calling me to do. I feel like I've had people speak into my life in this direction, and this is what I'm pursuing, and this is where I feel I'm being called to go next. And it was not that at all.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
so for you guys as pastors, as you know, is primarily dealing with students and young adults who are growing up and like being asked, well, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say this, like, and I'm not saying this just as a youth pastor, but also as a dad, like the single greatest stressful thing for my kids in their junior and senior year of high school was that question. What are you going to do next? I mean, so much so that like it terrified one of my kids. Like, and my kids are really smart. They're smart kids, but like to walk with them through, and they're still figuring it out. Right now, my daughter, Mara has 1 year left of college to get her bachelor's degree in business administration. And Micah just finished his freshman year at University of Pittsburgh. He's studying engineering. But the one challenge that I have with our students is, and I said this on Sunday too, is that I tell our students all the time that there are very few decisions you make that are permanent. There are a few, but trying to take the next step of faith in what you think God has called you to is that's what faith is. That's walking in faith. And so I heard when I was in college, I had lunch one day with a pastor that I really respect, and you know, when you're in college, and of course I was in Bible college to do this, and I said, you know, how do I know what God's will is? You know, it's because it's the big question there too. And he had this really interesting thing. He says, well, Scott, here's what I do. I walk through the doors that are open, and I don't walk through the doors that aren't.
Yeah.
And if a door opens in front of me, I'll walk through it until it's closed. And so, and so I've, you know, that's kind of how I've lived my life and career of, you know, if an opportunity arises, then I ask God and my wife, you know, now, you know, when you're married, you have a built-in like check and balance system. And, you know, and that will lead you to say yes and no to different things of, no, I don't think this is what I want. You know, I'm not quite ready for that, you know. I'll also say this too, that there are benefits to longevity in whatever you're doing. And one of the reasons why I see fruit in our student ministries today is because I've been here for 13 years. And it's very easy to, let me see if I can put it this way. I was involved in an interview process once at another church. We were hiring a high school pastor, and he had been in ministry for 10 years. And so on the surface, you think, wow, this guy has 10 years of experience. And then you look at his resume, and he'd been at 5 different churches for 2 years each. And it was our lead pastor at the time who said, look, let's just be clear. This guy doesn't have 10 years of experience. He has 2 years of experience 5 different times. And I was like, wow, that was really good. And that really helped me, because lots of times when you get to the longevity piece of God's plan and you're in the waiting for what's next, it's really easy to grow frustrated. You know, is it Paul who said, don't grow weary in well-doing, for in a due time you will reap.
Galatians.
You know, and so, and it's this idea of what do you do in the waiting? How are you preparing yourself for what God has next for you? And I think the way I said it on Sunday is, and I know I've said this last year at Student Takeover Day, is most times God is preparing you for what he has prepared for you. You're not ready to step in to what God has for you next. We think we are, you know, because we can do it. We can do it. It's ironic. Just last night, I was scrolling through. I was scrolling through TikTok on my phone, and I end up on a lot of like leadership guys talking about leadership. And there's like, last night I just happened to get on this string of videos of like HR directors of like here's how you lead meetings that don't stink, and all of this things of how you can better yourself. And it was the interesting thing that was hitting me is how much we can improve ourselves while we are in the waiting for what's next. I don't know if
that's good. Yeah. And the thing that pops in my head too, as we're talking about this, I think so many students struggle with like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Because I don't know if it's just a Western culture thing, but I think a lot of us find like our value in our achievements and in like what we do. And so I think there's maybe a lot of students that are like, well, if I don't, do this, if I don't solve cancer, if I don't, make a big name for myself, then like, well, what's my worth or what's my value? So like, I always try to like pastor students and say, take a big breath, your value is not dependent upon what you do, but it's like who you are. God loves you regardless.
Yeah. And
then the second thing I try to remind students of is like, what is God's known will? All right, God's known will is for you to have relationship with him. It's for you to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And so really whatever you do, you could be a teacher, a doctor, or a plumber or whatever, but like still that's your job here on earth, but your ultimate purpose is still to know God and make him known. And so like, how can you do that? So after kind of like prefacing all of that, the three things that someone told me one time is, what are your passions? So like, is there something you just really like to do? That might be a good way to help learn what you should do. What are your gifts? Because if you're really passionate about singing, but you can't sing, well, sorry, keep it to the shower. But like, you don't make a career out of it. You know what I mean? So like, what are you passionate about? What are you gifted at? And then the third thing would just be patience, right? Find your passion, find your gift. And then after that, like, it's step by step by step. You don't have to have everything figured out. But like, if you're passionate about helping people and you're gifted at medical and you want to be a nurse, well, like, okay, that's awesome. Maybe that's a direction.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you need to know all the answers. It's okay. Start out at a community college, take some steps, do what you need to do. But like, that's where I would just say it's the step-by-step model.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Colossians 3:17 says, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Like that was what came to mind when you were sharing that. And the other thought I had when you were sharing that is, when people see public ministry, I explain to our students, like, that's the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But an iceberg, you only see 10% above the water, 90% is under the water, right? So I've had students come to me over the years and say, "Oh, I want to do what you do. I want to preach like you preach." Well, no one really sees. No one saw the first time I preached was at a nursing home because a youth pastor gave me a shot and we did nursing home ministry. And quite frankly, it was probably a good thing that half the people couldn't hear me anyway. and I said the first time I ever preached a sermon, I think was probably the first time I preached a sermon in like a preaching class in college. I used the word "in closing" like 6 times, and in closing, and it got so bad that I was like, "in closing," and everybody laughed, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is not a joke anymore." And so, we don't see that. We just see the public part of it, and But I think that's true about anything that we're doing. Go look at if you're listening to this and you work a secular job, go look at your boss. Mm-hmm. Or the president of the company. Like, no one sees the pressure in the back room of, someone on Sunday, just one of our small group leaders came to me on Sunday, and they were paying me a compliment. And he said, "I want you to take this as a compliment." He goes, "I'm not sure. I've seen you at these huge events that we have, and I'm not sure I could have the customer service that you have. Like when a parent is upset because their kid's not in this room or whatever, Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, yeah, a lot of people always ask me as the youth pastor of this church, well, why don't you just make a deadline and stick to it? Mm-hmm. Like, this is the deadline. And I said, that's easy for you to say when it's not your job on the line based on how many people attend your events. And so, like, no, we want to get more kids involved. We want more kids to be able to come. And so, so that's the whole thing of like, look, you don't see the behind the scenes stuff, and the behind the scenes is actually much more important than the public.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, I think what I would challenge listeners to is when you're thinking about the next steps in your life in God's plan, ask yourself, what would it take for you to be ready for what you want to do?
Yeah.
You know, like I'm always struck by how many teenagers they come and they want to be on the worship team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to be on the worship team. Okay, great. So like, how long have you been singing? Oh, in my shower. You know, we had a student years ago. It's years ago now. They've already graduated from high school. So, and I don't even remember the student's name. So, but they came to audition, and they literally brought a Barbie guitar to the audition with them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that was just to show like they thought because they could play their Barbie guitar in their room that they could be on a worship team.
Yeah.
And they just weren't quite ready yet. And so so my point, I guess my challenge is
Sarna's grown a lot.
Sarna was leading the audition. When he told me it, I said, I saw the girl. The girl came in that morning. She's like, I'm looking for Pastor Dan. I'm here to audition. And she pulled out her pink guitar. And so, but yeah, that's so funny. But I just think that we just need to, it's a balance. We also need to spend part of our time saying, God, how do I get ready for what's next?
Yeah.
You know, and I've often said this about ministry, that I've always felt like a ministry or God seeking God's will is like, it's like jump rope. Yeah. I'm old enough that when we were on the playground in elementary school, they had like one giant jump rope and there was a line of kids. Mm-hmm. And when you got up to go in the jump rope, you basically got in and you could jump until you got out. And then you had to go to the back of the line. And for some reason, everybody just accepted that was how it worked. And I was terrible at it because I'm not really coordinated, but I remember standing on the sidelines and you're kind of moving your hands and watching the rhythm of the rope, trying to figure out when to jump in. Then you get in. And if you want to get out successfully, you have to get out on a certain rhythm too. Mm-hmm. You can't just stop and walk or you'll also fail. And so I've often felt like God's will is that as well. It's figuring out, when do I jump and when do I jump out? And I'm not quite sure I'm any good at it, but that's what I feel like it feels like sometimes.
You had one more thought on God's plan too. Like, sorry, I don't know what's happening with my voice right now, but Rebecca, my daughter, she's been in this phase, right, where she keeps asking me, like, Dad, play with me. Dad, play with me. And sometimes we'll be in the middle of playing. Like, we'll be, like, playing Play-Doh. And she'll be like, Dad, play with me. And I'm like, Rebecca, like, we're playing right now. Like, what do you want to do? And she'll be like, well, now I want to play Legos. And then we're playing Legos. Dad, play with me. Dad, play with me. Like, we're already playing. And I just think there's a lot of people, it's like, God, what's your plan for me? God, what's your plan for me? What's your plan? But sometimes God's like you're in it.
Yeah, that's
good.
You're
in the plan.
That's really
you're
good.
Doing it. And sometimes I have to remind myself, like, it's okay to dream and think about what's next, but sometimes you're in God's plan. And that's like the whole like phrase people say all the time, right? Comparison kills contentment. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you look at someone else's plan or what God's doing in someone else's life, and you're like, well, God, when are you going to do something in my life? And God's like, we are, like live in the plan that I have for you. And then that makes me think of Jeremiah, right? He was appointed to be a prophet to the nations, and he's being a prophet and he's sharing God's word. But Jeremiah didn't really ever have like this big success moment. He actually had a lamenting moment, right? He wrote Lamentations. Yeah. So he never had this pinnacle of like, I did it. Like the plan happened. And in fact, it was the opposite. It was more like he just kind of kept preaching and people kept disobeying, and then God's judgment kept coming. And so I think the other thing is like, let's measure success differently. Like, how do we know we're in God's plan? I think you might have said this early, like in your message, like it's not a Lamborghini. It's not a whatever, like it's not this name it, claim it, whatever. It's just like, I'm going to be faithful to what God's called me to do. I'm going to live in his plan. Yeah. I'm going to be content with that. And I don't know exactly what the result looks like, but I'm going to do what God called me to do. So,
yeah, it's great stuff, guys. We are out of time though.
Okay.
So just want to give an opportunity for just final thought, if you guys have anything, before we wrap up today's podcast. And yeah.
Get on
that was my final thought. That's all I got.
I have, I'll give you two phrases that I said Sunday during my message. One is, God's plan is not just good. It's personal, it's powerful, and it's already in motion. And then the other thought I would leave our listeners with would be that the greatest success isn't achieving your plan, it's aligning with his. And so the greatest success in our life isn't, the thought I just had is like, man, the greatest success in my life would be to be a success in God's eyes and not the world's eyes. And in order to do that, I have to align my plan with his plan. It's more important than achieving my own desires. And so the greatest success in life isn't achieving your plans, it's aligning to his.
That's good.
Good stuff, guys. Well, if you missed Sunday's message, you can always go back and catch it and catch up on it at our website, gtchurch.online, or on our YouTube channel, or listen to the sermon in podcast form wherever podcasts are available. And if you enjoy this podcast, make sure you share it with those in your life, your friends, your family, life group, serve team. We're every week we take Sunday's message and we dive deeper and just try to give you, the listener, more to just kind of think about, ponder about. Hopefully, God uses some of these conversations to speak to you. Coming up this Sunday, Pastor Scott is going to be closing out our Promises series.
Pastor Scott Kramer.
Yes. Yeah. Scott Kramer.
I was like, wait, am I preaching again?
No. Pastor Scott Kramer will be closing out the series on Promises this Sunday. And that will be to both campuses here at West Lawn and at North. And then we will dive into that conversation and that message next week. But until then, I hope that today's conversation has had an impact on your life as we all continue to grow together in Christ. Take care and God bless.